We have Sheriff Bill Gore as our special guest today. How you doing, Sheriff?
Good, Darin. How are you?
We really appreciate you being on, especially given the circumstances. I was looking at your website, doing some research about your scope of responsibility and all this, and you have so much to do day to day along with your team, and then I considered the extra effort that you must be carrying out right now. It must at times seem overwhelming, but so glad that you're the person in the seat carrying it out. So if you can, share with us some of the latest issues that have come up. I know, for example, that we are still working under these kind of two dual strategy, which is stay at home. We're trying to flatten the curve by keeping people home so they don't transmit coronavirus from one to another. And then the other issue is sort of building capability, that is expanding our ability to work with people that are in distress or in need of medical attention. What's the latest from your perspective?
I think you nailed it there, Darin. What we're trying to do is, we've seen it ad nauseum on cable news about what's going on in New York, which appears to be kind of the epicenter right now, with that curve going straight up. We've been in this stay-at-home phase for 2 weeks now, and all the public health officials tell us this next 2 weeks is going to be critical. If we can flatten this curve and stay in our houses and not spread this disease through San Diego County, we're not going to overwhelm our healthcare systems and try to keep the numbers manageable with all of our great healthcare organizations while they build up their capacity, while they try to get more ventilators, while they try to get more, masks and gowns and all that stuff they need, and compete with 49 other states in the country to try to get it. So I look at it as our role as a citizen, and I live in San Diego County, born and raised here, is to work all together so we can flatten that curve and let our medical health professionals get through this crisis. You got to remember, these public health orders, whether it's the governor's executive order or the public health order here in San Diego County, it's not to make life difficult for people. It's all about saving lives. And if we can get through this and not spread this disease, we will save lives. We won't overwhelm our healthcare system. So that's what it's all about. And I have to say, I'm very impressed with probably 98% of the people in this county. They're doing a great job.
Well, I'm sure everybody appreciates the feedback. You have some special responsibilities as a county authority. For those that don't know, you have, I think, 12 incorporated cities, including our largest city, which is the city of San Diego. Then you have everything else in what I call the island of San Diego, which is essentially the Mexican border out to sort of Borrega Springs in the desert. You got the ocean on the west, and then you have kind of Camp Pendleton on the north, and that's kind of the island of San Diego. If you're not in an incorporated city, you're being assisted by a set of county resources, and the sheriff is the law enforcement organization within that.
Yeah, well, actually, we police for all of unincorporated San Diego County, which is about 500,000 people, and then we police for 9 incorporated cities that choose to contract with the sheriff's department for police services. So that's another 500,000. So we police for about 1 million people, while the city of San Diego Police Department polices for 1.3 million in the city. But as you and I have talked before, Darin, that's just one of my operational responsibilities, the law enforcement. We also have responsibility for security in all the courtrooms, and we run 7 detention facilities, 7 jails in San Diego County.
I wanted to ask a little bit about your detention facilities. We talked about in the pre-show here that you just put an announcement out, I think within the last 30 or 40 minutes, that we've had our first detainee, incarcerated person that was actually tested positive for COVID-19.
Absolutely. We started watching this spread from China to this country, but in our jails, knowing that it was going to come to San Diego, we started a month ago looking at changing our booking procedures to slow down the intake into our jails, with the whole purpose of, well, first of all, trying to keep the virus out of our jails and really tough screening when people come in, and second, to lower our population in our jails so we can create space, so we can have specific modules, cells for isolation of our inmates that might become ill or need to be isolated before they become ill, and also to do this type of physical distancing, social distancing that we're trying to do throughout San Diego County. As you can imagine, jails were not made for social distancing. So the only way you can accomplish that in our 7 facilities is to lower the population. So we can kind of spread out the inmates we do have. It makes it safer for the inmates. We create isolation beds, and it makes it safer for my staff, my professional staff and sworn staff that are working in those facilities. So it was kind of a double effort here to lower the population, create space, and do some very, very significant screening. We knew it was going to get into our jails, and as we predicted, one inmate was booked on Monday, symptomatic at the time. He was placed in isolation because of the symptoms he had. He was tested. The test came back yesterday that he was positive. Fortunately, because of our screening process, we suspected he might be positive, and he was isolated. But we've done contact investigations who he might have come in contact with. But and he's been in isolation since he's been in our custody. Plus, we went back to the arresting agency, which was El Cajon Police Department, and notified them so they could notify their employees that might have had contact. It's what we anticipated, and I think we handled this as well as we possibly could.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that process. It makes complete logical sense that you would do it exactly like that. I would also imagine that in some ways, the prison population in our region is in some ways less susceptible because they are, in a sense, quarantined already. I would imagine that some of the threats that you face there are actually, I shouldn't say threats, but some of the exposures actually come from people coming to the jail from outside, either visitors or even the guards, because they're the ones that are out kind of in social public.
Absolutely, and that's why we've stopped all contact visits, into our facilities. So the only way you can have a visit with an inmate is over the telephone or a video conference that we have in our facilities. All of their social visits are discontinued. We've also stopped bringing in the civilians from outside that come in to our facilities to provide rehabilitation programming. That's all stopped, all in an effort to keep the disease out of our facilities to start with, because we know in that very confined environment, it's difficult to stop the spread. So we're trying to keep it from getting in, but we're also creating bed space so that when it is in, we can isolate the people so it doesn't spread too rapidly.
Understood. I know that we've known each other for a while, and I'm so appreciative to you and your team for collaborating with the cities and within all of the unincorporated areas. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
You hit the nail on the head there, Darin, when you said team, because that's what it's all about. I've got a tremendous team, and then the whole public safety team in San Diego County, federal, state, and local, is exceptional. I've worked all over the United States in my previous life in the FBI, and this just doesn't exist in other parts of the country. And I'm fortunate to work in it, but the real winners are the people of this county, because there's no duplication of efforts. There's no reinventing the wheel. It's just a seamless level of cooperation.
Well, you and I have been talking about cybersecurity for 10 years. And when I think about it, knowing your work from the FBI and 10 years ago when you and I were talking about cybersecurity, I remember you said exactly the same thing. And it is just, I think, a San Diego phenomenon that we really collaborate well, especially across these kind of typical federal, state, and local silos, which can exist. I think we do a better than usual job. You hear about it from other places where, hey, the trains run, but you just don't have the same sense of integrated collaboration and quality of experience.
Well, as you know, the bad guys don't care if they're in El Cajon or La Mesa or San Diego or Phoenix or what state they're in. And so to the extent we let those jurisdictional boundaries impact good law enforcement, shame on us. And it just doesn't happen here. You remember back, Darin, we had in like it was 1998, 1999, the first regional computer forensics laboratory in the United States.
That's right.
It was done right here in San Diego. And it was federal, state, and local all coming together because we're all facing the same challenge.
Yep, exactly. So share a little bit about what it looks like for your officers to help to protect the community as we've moved into this critical stage. You know, you and I, again, were talking in the pregame that we really are at, we hope, the top of the peak or the peak area here. And there's this sort of capped area where we can stave off transmission and then start on a downward slope. But if we don't stay the course, we might actually spike back up. So in terms of some of the mandates that have and recommendations that have started to come out from the county, I think there was initially, hey, clear the beaches, don't be in public space. And that was, you know, sort of sent out through our media, echoed by city leadership, county leadership. And we've kind of now notched it up a little bit, right? We've closed the beaches. Absolutely. We've kind of taken a firmer position to make sure that people aren't where they're not supposed to be. And I think maybe we're sort of notching up one more level now as we hopefully are in the peak time of this, and that is actually enforcing through citation, through contact, where your team is going to be a little firmer to make sure that people are doing what their part to keep others safe.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to point out that probably 95% of the people or more in this county have done a great job of following the public health order, and I think it's important we highlight that. This is an order. It's not a public health recommendation that's nice to follow when it's convenient. This is an order. And what we tried to do in the last a couple of weeks since it's been in effect is education of the public and trying to get them to voluntarily comply with this. And like I say, the vast majority of people have. But we're getting to this point in this process, if we're really going to make a difference, that there's a small percentage that don't get it, that don't believe it, don't think they're going to get the illness, they don't believe that it's really a problem. And to that small group of people that are out not keeping the social distancing, doing pickup basketball games or gathering in skate parks and not observing that physical distancing requirement, we're going to start issuing citations. And citations carry up to $1,000 fine or the maximum, or 6 months in jail. Now, that's not going to happen on a first offense or something like that. But I think we're beyond the volunteer education and volunteer stage. We've got to really send a message. This is serious, and if we follow this, we're going to save lives. That's what it's about. It's about saving lives. So I know it's inconvenient, it's stressful, it causes anxiety. It does with all of my deputies and all my employees too. But I think we got to take a step back and look at the big picture and how we're going to keep our health system intact and really save lives.
Well, you said at the top of the show that this is about staying the course. You know, we've got to make this last push. Hopefully, we've all got our fingers crossed. No one knows the future. But it looks like if we're following some of the patterns that we've already seen established across the globe, that if we can get through this peak time, because in fact, the virus is sort of washing through our community as we speak, it may be kind of at peak. And then once it sort of washes through, hopefully we're not going to see it ever again, but certainly not until the next season.
Right. And hopefully that time we have some vaccines or some cures, something like that will help us, which just doesn't exist right now.
Exactly. So one of the new recommendations, and perhaps it's a mandate you can share, is that people should place mask on their face, some type of facial covering, which they're still going to be breathing their germs, if you will, through the air. But my understanding is that maybe saliva, things that you might spit out, won't be as transmittable. And that, again, by having those facial coverings, we can kind of contain some of the spread of COVID-19.
The expansion on the public health order was announced yesterday at the 2:30 press conference, was that the people serving in our essential areas that have regular contact with the public, your grocery stores, your pharmacies, your gas stations, the requirement now is that they will wear some type of facial mask. Also in the press conference, they discussed the advisability of when you're out in public to have some type of, maybe not a surgical mask because those are in really rare supply right now, but some type of a face covering. Now that's not going to protect you from incoming if you're around an infected person, but the problem with this disease is before you're symptomatic, you're spreading this disease. So you might think you're fine, but you could be spreading this, and by wearing some kind of a face guard that keeps you from expelling the virus germs into the air. And I think it's another step. It's not mandatory, but it's something I think that we should all give our citizens to give some strong consideration to, since we are all in this together, and that's the key. We're in this together, and it just makes sense to do everything we can. Like I say, so we're through it in 2 to 3 weeks instead of 2 to 3 months.
Absolutely, and that's what we're trying to do is get back to our normal lives as quickly as possible. So I mentioned to Mike, I'm sporting my cycling baklava as I'm going out into public. We'll be sure to post some pictures. I can only imagine what Mike will be wearing. He's always so stylish. So I'm sure we'll look forward to seeing that. In the meantime, there is some semblance of normal life going on, and just sort of 2 more issues I wanted to cover before we kick you loose is if people need sort of license and registration services, what is their best means to take care of that daily business? You're still open for business. It's just being done in a different way.
Yeah, I think of, I always think of DMV. They've postponed a lot of the requirements for motor vehicles, knowing that people are just not going to be out and around. We do a lot of the licensing in the Sheriff's Department. We register drug offenders, we register sex offenders, we do the concealed weapons licensing, and all that has been put on hold during this crisis, with the exception of registering sex offenders, which by law has to be done in person, but what we're doing is doing those by appointment and practicing the social distancing when the sex offender comes in to register. But a lot of the other things that the state requires have been postponed or delayed while we get through this crisis.
You know, you mentioned concealed weapons. I don't think you issue a lot of those. I am a gun owner.
We've looked starting about a year or 2 ago, we looked at as you probably followed me personally in this department, was our case on how we deal with concealed weapons permit was taken to the Supreme Court, and our policy was found to be upheld. But after that was all done, then we looked at how we can meet the people that want CCWs halfway. Are there some restrictions that we can loosen? So I think we've done a pretty good job on that, although there still are the requirement for good cause. It's not just that I want one.
Yeah.
And we've actually more than doubled the number of concealed weapons permits that we have out in the community over the last couple of years. So
that's good information.
We're trying to get a good balance here of
Understood.
Protecting people's rights, plus to keep and bear arms, but also complying with the California state law, which is different than 42 other laws in the country. 42 other state laws, it says to get a CCW, you have to have proof of good cause.
Excellent. I appreciate you sharing that. And I ask these questions because this is a kind of unique thing that you all do within the county sheriff's department. I did want to ask a little bit about your statement about firearm retailers. As I said, I'm a registered gun owner, but I want to appeal to people to pack the guns away, put them in your safe. You don't need to squat to protect your toilet paper. It's all going to be fine. People have been, as I think we all see, very civil in this, and this is a time to sort of lay those firearms down and make sure that we're being good citizens. And there is some steps that you've taken in terms of firearm retail.
Yeah, that was an issue we dealt with probably about 10 days ago. Is that an essential business? As you can imagine, there's some group of citizens that think that's a Second Amendment right. You can't, no regulation is good when it comes to gun ownership. And I don't think anybody can deny there's been a lot of anxiety and tension in our communities and fear. And what that leads to is a big increase in people wanting to purchase firearms. So I was hoping to get clarification from the governor of California on whether gun shops and the sale of guns was a critical part of our critical infrastructure. And the next day, after talking to his staff, he came out and said that he was going to leave it up to individual sheriffs. My position was the gun shops provide a valuable service in the state, and they enforcing the really strict gun laws that California has as far as 10-day waiting periods, that only selling certain firearms, the background investigation, a check that's done before you purchase a firearm. during this time of really, really high demand, if we close all the gun shops down, people are going to, I think, be forced into a black market to purchase these guns illegally in their anxiety or fear at the time. So that was kind of the balance I struck, and I said I want to keep them open, but close them to the public access if they can, and just do by appointment only. And to the extent we're going to still enforce the social distancing requirements on their shop, so you don't have 100 people in their shop at one time, and enforce those laws. So that was my decision. I would say most of the Southern California sheriffs were in the same boat as I was and made that same determination. And then just 3 days ago, at the federal level, the Department of Homeland Security amended their 16 critical infrastructure categories to include gun shops. So I'm not saying that it supported what I said, but I think it was good in that it confirmed it, and we didn't have to flip-flop back and forth, close them, open them, close them, open them. So that status is now they're open. I know that upsets a lot of people, but they gave me that responsibility, and that's the judgment I made.
Is that part of the difficulty in managing this crisis and lack of clarity from the levels of government kind of above, at the federal or state levels? I have to imagine when you're trying to make decisions, it would be helpful to be in line with those policies, but if they don't exist, you're kind of left to fend for yourself.
Yeah, it's hard to come up with, when you have a broad order, whether it's the state executive order or the public health order, to come up with verbiage that covers every possible eventuality. What about this business? What about that? So you kind of deal in generalities. That's the way it has to be. And then you leave it to people like chiefs of police and sheriffs to use their good common sense and discretion to interpret that law. And that's what I think you're seeing all over the state of California.
Well, let's agree, because I think it would be fascinating for our listeners as well as instructed to have you come back when things settle down a little bit and talk about leadership, because I'm always fascinated when I talk to a top leader like yourself and all of the challenging decisions that you have to make, those tough calls, if you will. No one gives you a perfect script on how to do that, right? Because you've got just different inputs and variation coming from so many different places. So let's agree that we'll do a show on leadership together, because I think you could help a lot of our startups, our entrepreneurs and CEOs that work in our community.
That would be great, Darin. I'd love it. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you. We've our special guest, Sheriff Bill Gore. Thank you for all your effort. He's been our sheriff since 2009, doing a phenomenal job along with his team. And please, we just appeal to you to follow the recommendations and mandates. Do your best to be a good citizen. This is not a time to pressure rights harder than you need to. Everything I've seen indicates that law enforcement, all of the civil agencies have been very respectful of people. I know that's going to continue. And again, if we're all in this together, we all need to collaborate and work as a united front. So with that, on behalf of my co-host, Mike Carroll, our special guest, Sheriff Gore. Sheriff Gore, before we cut out, is there a good resource? We've been talking about the coronavirus-sd.org site. I did note that you had your own site, which is sdsheriff.net. Any other resources you'd like to share?
All the information about our jails, what we're doing in law enforcement, our enforcement operations, it's all clearly posted on our website. So I really encourage people to look at that. We're not trying to hide the ball. There's no secrets. We're just trying to educate everybody in the county and convince them we're in this together. And all the information that we talked about today basically is on our website.
Yeah, and I will just repeat that website, which is www.sdsheriff.net. I'm on the site right now. It's chock full of excellent information. You can obtain more in-depth information about a lot of the topics that we just talked about. It's all laid out there. So again, Sheriff, thanks for keeping us safe. Thanks for the great job that you're doing. And we hope to have you back soon.
Thanks, Darin. Good to be on.
Bye, everyone.